Hi, I'm Lisa, the artist behind Lachri Fine Art. It is Tuesday, so I'm here to critique one of your original paintings or drawings. If you have an original painting or drawing that you would like to submit for critique, head over to my website, lachri.com/critiques. The link is below in the video description, and you can submit your work there. Also, I say that on every single video, yet I still have people asking, where do I submit for critique? I'm not even going to answer those questions anymore. It's in the video every single time I tell you. Pay attention to the things. Today's critique comes from a young artist, Lane Lambden, who has drawn Johnny Depp in Graphite. Lane's goals were realism, and he said he's having a hard time having the portrait come out realistic enough that he feels like he still has a very cartoony look to his work. The first thing that I am drawn to on this piece is the contrast. This is great. You were not afraid to let your lights be lights and your darks dark. You did such a good job getting that contrast here. Your drawing is actually pretty accurate, so that's also good there too. The hair looks great. You did such a good job of getting it to look like clumps and those larger strands versus a bunch of little individual strands all over. You followed the movement of the hair. You did a really good job here. So taking a look at a few things we can adjust to improve on this even more. As usual, I imported this over into Photoshop, laid your reference photo on top of your work, and then outlined the reference photo in red, dropped the reference photo out, and now we can see where some adjustments can be made on the drawing itself. You're very close. There are only a few minor changes that you would want to make, and you can see that with the red lines here. But watch out for certain little things, like if the eye is just a little, just tiny amount too open, it will change the expression and change the look of the person. So make sure just pay close attention to tiny details like that. And a big tip I have when you're drawing is to flip your work upside down and flip your reference photo upside down and compare that way. It makes it so much easier to judge different shapes, to tell if you have something that's open too much or closed too much or too far to the left, anything like that. It is so much easier to tell that when it's upside down, because you're forcing your brain to look at it as a shape instead of an eye, which really does make a big difference. Now, one thing that's a little bit odd about the reference photo is on the one side of his face, his nose is so heavily shadowed that it almost looks deformed. We all know Johnny Depp has a beautiful nose, so there's no deformity there. This is because of the reference photo and the way that the lighting was, and the way that the photographer hyped up the contrast so that it dropped out the underside of his nose. You can't really see where the nose ends and where the shadow begins, which is fine for a photograph, because when you look at a photo, you just assume it's right. It's a photograph. Obviously, it's right. But when you draw it, even though you draw it exactly like it is in the photo, people are going to assume you did it wrong. So here, this is where, as an artist, you want to come through and make some adjustments by just putting a little bit of a highlight underneath where the nose ends and where the shadow begins. Just a tiny, I don't mean like a highlight that's white. I mean just a hint of it being a little bit of a lighter color there so that you can see where the nose is. That will make it obvious that you have not drawn this wrong, that the nose is even all the way across. Just make sure that it's minor, very subtle. You don't want a bright line there either. Now, the main two complaints that you had is that you felt you were getting too much of a cartoony look, and you couldn't get your dark pencils dark enough. You're working with an 8B lead. There are two solutions that I go with when I want my darks to be darker. One is to use carbon pencil. Carbon pencil is somewhere in between charcoal and graphite. It's harder than charcoal. It's not going to smudge as easily, but it's a lot darker than the graphite. The thing to keep in mind here is that the carbon pencil is very matte, whereas your graphite is going to have a gloss to it. So you want to watch how you're building your layers there to avoid having the graphite come out very glossy up against a very matte finished area of the carbon pencil. If you're using the graphite in light layers and building up that way, you're not going to have as much of the gloss. I personally, it doesn't really bother me, but I know some artists it really does. So that's something to be aware of if you choose to go with the carbon pencil. You may be fighting an area that's matte and an area that's very glossy. Here's a sample of a piece that I did mixing graphite and carbon pencil. My darks are completely black. And the other thing with this is that you're going to tend to get more of a gritty look with the carbon pencil than you do with the graphite. I personally like that look on skin because I don't want the skin to be too smooth so that it looks like plastic, so it gives a bit more texture. So for me, I love that look, but it is something that you want to be aware of. Now, the next thing that I do to get my darks really dark, if I want to stick with just graphite, is use AN4B lead in a mechanical pencil. You'll have to do a Google search to find it. It's surprisingly hard to find sometimes, but this lead is going to get, that 4B will get way darker than your 8B lead. It's really soft, and everything just gets very dark with it. So that's another way that you can darken up your graphite and still stick with graphite. The other thing that you said you were having trouble with was getting away from the cartoony look. What's causing the cartoony look here are your outlines. You're outlining the side of the face and the ear and the lips, and everything's outlined. Cartoons are outlined. People are not. With people or anything where you're going more for realism, everything's going to be a shadow, not a line. The exceptions to that would be around the eyes. You will sometimes have heavier lines there. Or if a woman is wearing heavy makeup, she may have a harsher line around her lips, but even then there's slight feathering with the lipstick if you're doing super realistic work. Nothing should have a heavy outline. Everything are just variations of shadow. Sometimes it's just creating a high contrast between the background and the subject. Sometimes it's softly fading the background to the subject, but everything is just a shadow. No lines whatsoever. If you drop out all of the lines, that's going to fix the cartoony look that you're struggling with right there. Talking about lips, remember you also will generally have the upper lip, depending on how the lighting is, and that would be the case here. The upper lip should be darker than the bottom lip, and that's because of how the light hits and how the upper lip is downturned, so it's going to be cast in shadow. But again, if you drop out the outline that you have on the upper lip, that will make a big difference too. You've done a great job here. Really, really nice work. If you guys want to check out more of Lane's work, I have a link to his website below in the video description. Thanks for watching. If you're new to my channel, I have new video critiques every Tuesday where I'm critiquing your original paintings or drawings, my own speed paintings, drawings, and tutorials every Wednesday, social media tips for artists each Thursday, and artist vlogs every weekend. So if you haven't already, I would love for you to subscribe so you don't miss out on anything. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Google+. All of those social media sites are linked below in the video description where you can keep up with news, my newest work, and see real-time clips of whatever it is I'm currently working on. I'll see you guys tomorrow.